Welcome to Think Deeply, Speak Simply, brought to you by Prezent, a show about the art and science of communicating ideas and how business professionals can unlock their careers and achieve their full potential with great communication. And now, here are your hosts, Jay Rook and Antoine Valentone.
Okay.
And with that, let's welcome Marilee Adams to the show. Marilee, thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to have you.
I am looking forward to it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Marilee, you're the author of Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, 12 Powerful Tools for Leadership, Coaching, and Results. Tell us about what inspired you to write this book and what question thinking is all about.
Well, that's two different questions, so I'll answer them separately. The first one was, what got me to write the book? So I'll do that, and then we'll talk about question thinking, and they're obviously very connected. So the first book I wrote was a psychology textbook called The Art of the Question, and it did very, very well as a textbook. But people like my brother, who's a businessman, really got a little bit lost because there was so much theory in it. So he said to me one day, "Oh, well, I made it through the first chapter." And my epiphany was, I need to write a book that's accessible to the general public. So I wrote Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. It has all the theory, but more importantly, it has the tools and the methods integrated into a story so that it's very relatable. And I am often thanked by people for, "Oh, thank you for writing it like a story. I could really identify with the main character."
That's great.
And so it really worked. And I think that's why it became an international bestseller, because people could relate to the story. And I can also tell by the emails they send us. So that's why I wrote the book, because I really wanted it to make a big difference. And textbooks don't usually do that, at least not to a large audience. And then the second question about question thinking. Well, all of my work is about question thinking, and it's actually a new way of thinking about thinking. And as you know, the better our thinking is, the better our behavior, the better our relationships, and the better our results. So question thinking simply means that we literally think with questions, but we don't typically notice that. And when people are able to observe and notice the questions they think with, and they have ways to assess whether the questions are helpful or not helpful, and ways to change the questions, then they have a wonderful method that they can basically use anywhere in their lives for the rest of their lives. And I'll talk about that more as we get into some of your other questions.
Sure.
Wonderful. This is super exciting. In reading about the book, help me understand the difference between the judger mindset versus a learner mindset, and what are the benefits of a learner mindset?
Well, mindset goes along with question thinking. Actually, it's part of it, because the mindset from which we ask a question, whether we're asking it to ourselves or to somebody else, has a huge influence on the impact of the question, and then how effective it is in whatever arena we're asking the question. So we have two basic mindsets, and this is all illustrated in the book through a lot of different stories. So one mindset that we all have is what I call a learner mindset, and another mindset, the other one, is judger mindset. It's important to remember they're both normal. Everybody has both, and we always will. So it's not a question of getting rid of one. It's a question of learning to manage our mindsets, and being aware of our mindsets helps us enormously. So when we, and this is a big we, like all of us human beings, when we're in our judger mindset, we tend to be more closed-minded, short-sighted, we can be sort of in win-lose, and judger mindset literally closes possibilities. And we all have judger mindset. Sometimes it can be useful if we notice that we're concerned about something. It could drive us to feeling anxious. If we start questioning what it is we're anxious about or concerned about, then that can be useful. And judger, for your audience, I think most of you all know, I've heard of the term emotional intelligence and how our brains affect how we think, how we relate. So judger is more connected to the amygdala, the fear-based part of our brain, where survival and protection are important. And of course, we need that. The other mindset we have, and we all have, is learner mindset. And when we're in learner mindset, we're more open-minded. We think from multiple perspectives. We are more in a win-win, whether it's with an individual or a team or an organization or a family member, because this is sort of a sidebar. Everything I'm saying that makes a difference professionally also makes a difference personally. And I do this work in large organizations, government agencies, with coaches and it's the same material applied in all these different ways. And it has a measurable positive impact, which of course is very exciting to watch happen.
Absolutely. And as you're describing that we all have both of these mindsets available to us and in us, when we are finding ourselves that we're in the judgment mindset, how do you advise individuals to start to shift so that they move over more into the learner mindset?
Okay, first, I'm going to answer that with a number of different ways. But first, let's not use judgment. Let's say judgmental.
Gotcha.
Because everybody needs good judgment. And we use our learner mindsets for that. When we're in what I call judger mindset, we're being judgmental, which means pretty critical to self and to others, because we aim our mindsets at ourselves and others. So the first step of making the switch is noticing where you are. And you both know, and everybody in the audience knows, that change begins with awareness and honesty about our awareness. So when we can notice what mindset we're in, so if I notice, if I ask myself, well, Marilee, are you in judger mindset? If I can say yes, but here's the kicker, non-judgmentally, now I have a pathway to switch. And so it's the non-judgmental awareness that allows us to move into learner. And learner is where, I'm going to talk about learner leadership, inquiring leadership, which, by the way, is the title of the last chapter in Change Your Questions. And when we're in learner, our thinking is better. The way that we relate is better. The way we collaborate is better. And it makes a tangible, measurable difference. So the central skill is noticing judger and switching to learner. And later on, I'm going to talk about a graphic that's in the book called the choice map. And the choice map illustrates the two mindsets and the switching lane and how to ask the kinds of questions that literally can move us from judger to learner mindset.
That's a perfect segue, because I was meaning to ask you about how inquiry pushes us into new territories via the questions we ask ourselves and others. So in your opinion, what are the best questions to ask when we're seeking to drive change within our organization?
Oh, that's a big question to unpack. But what I'm going to do is talk about questions to ask ourselves, whether I'm a leader or a manager or a team member, whatever. What are the best questions to ask myself? Because that's going to impact how I relate to others. So first we're going to start. So that's where I'm bringing question thinking back in. But then let me give you some examples of questions that to ask yourself. So remember that if you're leading change, it's such a complicated and fascinating question, because it could be an imposed change. It could be a natural, organic change. But even if it's really a positive change, many people have concern about change. And so it would be really important for the person who is not just driving change, but I would add some words to that. Driving change, inviting change, collaborating around change, having people engage in change together rather than just imposing it on them. But if I'm the person that's responsible, or one of the people responsible for creating change, I would be asking myself questions like, what do people need to know? Do they understand the reasons why we're creating these changes? How can I communicate to them in the most effective way that engages their curiosity and enthusiasm? And how can I communicate in a way that keeps them from falling into judger about change? So that's how you would marry question thinking with how one communicates. But remember that all change, and this is a big one, begins with new questions. Mm-hmm. And if you want a new question, if you want a change, if you want an innovation, which hopefully the change will be, then you need new questions for people to be thinking with and to be asking other people as well. So all of that gets loaded into that very loaded question.
Great answer. Earlier, you were saying how you do some of this work within corporations and governmental agencies, et cetera. We've talked a little bit about how we do this internally on an individual level. How do we apply this when we get to more of an entity level and we're trying to make this a new way of corporate culture?
Well, let's approach that both from the individual thinking level and also the corporate level. So, and the organizational level. So I'll give an example. We as my company, Inquiry Institute, and my team of colleagues, we've done some work with the Federal Reserve Board, and they had read Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. They were enthusiastic about bringing the questioning and mindset work in, and they specifically wanted to create a learner culture at the board. And so we've done some workshops there. We have had some members of their teams engage in Inquiry Institute's long immersive programs, which was great because we wanted internal people at the board to be able to drive the change, not just us from outside. And they have been doing that. And so that's at the corporate level, but it's also at the team and individual level. And then that brings me back to the mindset work, because if you want a culture of innovation, if you want a culture of engagement, if you want a coaching culture, if you want a high performance culture, it's always going to work better if most people, most of the time, are in learner mindset. And so when I work with teams, it's the same thing. And I'll ask a question that you'll laugh because it's so obvious. Have you ever been on a judger team?
Absolutely.
Of course. And probably everybody listening is laughing because you have too. Mm-hmm. And have you ever been on a learner team? Yes. And then ask yourself, what's the difference? Mm-hmm. It's intuitively obvious. I've spent 9 months with a very difficult team doing nothing but questioning and mindset work, and it was transformational. It was wonderful.
That sounds amazing. Tell me this, it's now the 4th edition of your book, and you wrote a new chapter on neuroscience and what it reveals about managing our stresses and fears more effectively. For many of us, myself included, delivering presentations can induce both stress and fear. What did you learn from the neuroscience research that we can share with business leaders on how to conquer those emotions?
I have 2 answers for that. One, everybody leaders included, and I teach leadership in a lot of different places and at American University for 10 years, all of it based on the work in the book. Everybody needs to know how to manage stress, how to notice physical signs of anxiety, and how to calm ourselves, which could be breathing, it could be mindfulness, it could be taking a walk before you talk to somebody that you might be really judgy with on the phone if you don't switch yourself first. So the first thing is everybody needs to have tools for, and we call them somatic practices because it has to do with the body. And so we incorporate that all the time in our trainings, both for leaders, teams, every place. So that's the first answer. The second answer, and wait a minute. About presentations. So, of which I do many. And I have watched myself and my question thinking when I'm nervous about a presentation, and I'm always at that point noticing that I'm asking myself questions like, am I doing okay? Or even sometimes, do they like me? Do they like the material? Am I getting through? But notice those questions are about me. And when I notice that I'm asking those questions, then I can switch my questions. And that also switches my engagement and my connection with them. So if I'm asking myself questions like, what do they need? What's most important to them? What will empower them? What will be practical? And then I'm speaking in answer to those questions. I'm focused on my audience, not on myself. And that always works out better.
Great answer there. What about today's theme would you like to talk about that we haven't discussed yet?
Well, there are a number of things. First of all, we talk about questions like everybody knows what questions are and what they do. A, that's not true. And B, sometimes it really does take courage to ask questions. Courage as a leader, courage as a team member, sometimes as a team leader. And yet, if we don't ask questions and ask them well, which means primarily ask your questions from learner mindset and it'll be a totally different experience, then that's what's going to really make a difference. So ask questions from learner, get the courage to do it. And even if you're a little nervous about it, you could say that. And remember, here's one of the sayings from the book. Every question missed is a potential crisis waiting to happen. If you keep that in mind, it's very inspiring to get the courage to ask the question, because if you miss a question, that miss could have terrible consequences. I remember a company that got in touch with me after somebody had missed, it was a global company, supply chain company, somebody had missed a really important question and it cost them $26 million. And they had just read Change Your Questions and they said, oh, we need to learn how to ask better questions and lots of them quickly. And so we did some wonderful work together because they understood that if they missed questions, it's going to set them up for some crises and not the results that they want.
Right. In this case, 26 million worth.
It should get your attention, right?
Indeed. Indeed. This is a question we ask all our guests on the show. Do you think great business communication is more of an art, a science, and why?
It's both. And I'll take them separately. There's a science to it. There's really a science to understanding all the reasons to ask questions, when to ask them, how to ask them, in what circumstances to ask them. So that there is a lot to know about question asking. At the same time, we're not robots and we're responsive. So we want to be asking questions that engage people, that get their best thinking. and another quote from the book, a question can be a request, an invitation, a catalyst, as in coaching, or a missile. What impact do you want your questions to have? And that gets people's attention, because if they're wanting to have a positive impact, they're going to be asking learner questions and asking them as an invitation, a request, or a catalyst. Absolutely.
Marilee, last question for you today. What advice would you have for aspiring business professionals that want to improve their communication?
Well, it's so interesting. Most people think that communication is something that comes out of your mouth or out of your fingers. And of course, that's true. But it's more true that communication begins with how we think. So the more aware we are of the mindset we're in and the questions that we're thinking with, the more power we have to manage what comes out of our mouth. So that quote I just gave you, what impact do you want? That's a really important question. And here's also a sort of a design tip for people who want to become better question askers. Ask yourself, what impact do I want my question to have? What do I want my question to accomplish? And if I'm thinking about that, my intention is over there, not on me or how perfect the question is. That doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. What does matter is the intention of the question and the connection between the question asker and the question receiver. Now, I could go much further on that, but I don't know how much time we have.
No, it's good.
This has been wonderful. I want to give you the opportunity to tell us and our viewers where they can learn more about you. Obviously, it sounds like you're just a fountain of information, and we couldn't possibly cover everything in the amount of time we have today. We just scratched the surface. So tell us where people can find you on social media and the internet, et cetera.
Well, the easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is inquiryinstitute.com. And then there'll be links to all the other social media places there. But also on the Inquiry Institute site, you can get a free download of the choice map, which is very, very, very useful. And so people have to take a short quiz that's useful to them, then they can get a download of the choice map, which illustrates both learner and judger mindsets, the kinds of questions we ask in each mindset, and also how to switch from judger to learner by the kinds of questions that we ask ourselves. Also on the website, there are a lot of free resources. There are blogs and interviews and articles and an increasingly engaged global learner community, which is very, very exciting. And we would love to have people become part of that.
Excellent. Yeah, and I very much encourage our listeners to go to your website and download the choice map. It's quite insightful. And I love what we talked about today about learning how to ask ourselves more effective questions. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you and all the information that you shared with us today.
And I appreciate the opportunity to share this material. And I love the title, by the way, of your podcast. It's exactly what leaders should be doing. Think deeply, speak simply. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Think Deeply, Speak Simply. To learn more about the art and science of communicating ideas, visit our free resources at Prezent.com. That's Prezent.com.